Okay, so this is our guided viewing for the video that is associated with chapter 1. And as you'll see, each chapter has a video that is associated with the topics that are discussed. And so we're going to talk about some of those in this video that we see here. And we'll have another guided viewing that discusses the topics that are covered in the second and third parts as well. So on this guided video viewing, we will talk about just the grammatical and vocabulary topics that are discussed in Chapitre 1, Chapter 1, Partie 1, Part 1. So this is the guided viewing for Chapter 1, Part 1. And that should underline for you the fact that you need to view the video multiple times over the course of the chapter, so all of the parts, in order to understand how the language components that we're learning are actually used in a context. So in this chapter, we're going to start off with some vocabulary. And we can see on page 33, maybe this is one of those pages that seems unimportant, but when we're looking for context in a foreign language, it can really help us. So our vocabulary will include numbers 60 through 100. If we turn the page to page 34, we're also going to see some activities, some words that we can use to describe our activities, okay? And you can see here that all of these words end in ER. Cuisiner, manger, déjeuner, dîner. And they're all activities, they're all verbs. So words that describe what we would do. And in French, ER verbs, or verbs that end in ER, are the most common types of verbs. And when we go through our grammar PowerPoint, we'll talk about how they're conjugated and the importance of them. But here we can just notice those as we're looking through our book and really understand what we're going to look at in this viewing of the video. So if we go back to the first page of the chapter, we see that we're going to learn those numbers and the regular ER verbs. And whenever we see a verb in French that ends in ER, or a word that ends in ER, we can assume that it's an ER verb. That can be our first step in figuring out what it means. We can assume that it's a verb, it's an action word, and we can look it up in the dictionary if it doesn't look like something that we've already seen in English. We're also going to learn about the pronoun on, which means one. And so in English, we might use that as one would go to the restaurant, or one would go to Valdosta State. But in French, it doesn't sound quite as snooty as we often associate it to be in English. So we use it a lot more commonly in French. And we also can use it in a very familiar context to replace the word oui instead of using nous. So I could say on est dans la classe de français instead of saying nous sommes dans la classe de français, just as a really kind of slang usage of it. And we'll talk about that again in more detail in our PowerPoint. We're also going to learn how to make statements negative. So we know about these activities, and we're also going to know about how to talk about them as if we're not doing them. And then we're going to learn about disjunctive or stressed pronouns. And the best way to describe this without getting into too much detail, because again, you'll have a PowerPoint that discusses that with me posted on BlazeView, is the difference between saying je, which means I, so that's a subject pronoun. I go to school, right? Je, I. But then we also have another kind of pronoun that's called this disjunctive or stressed pronoun. And so we would say moi. We can think about Miss Piggy. Moi, meaning me. Moi, je vais à l'école. Okay? So the difference between I and me in English, that exists in French as well. So we're going to explore that in our PowerPoints as well this week. But first, we always want to start out with the movie. And so again, you'll have guided viewings of the movies that will focus on the themes for that week. So we're going to focus on those things for this week. And you're going to want to view the movies over and over again. There are going to be some things that I point out that you might not have caught until the 5th or 6th viewing. But you want to make sure that you view them multiple times so that you're seeing that input of language come in for you. So let's go to the movie here. Just going to go to my video library as always. See, I'm going to turn on my French captions. Click play. So we see the young woman that we've seen before, Claire.
Ah, Claire, tu es déjà arrivée.
Okay, so again, we're confirming here that we've seen Claire. I cannot stress to you the importance of background clues. So again, this probably isn't some place to go for fun or a restaurant. Obviously, it's either work or maybe a gym. We don't know yet, but we can gather those background clues. We can gather that information. We can also see this form of the verb être that we learned in the last chapter. So tu es. And even though this is a past tense, we can kind of get a sense of what she means. Tu es, you are, arrivé. And in the past tense, oh, you've arrived. But even if all we got from that was you are arrived, then that's great. That's great because we've noticed this cognate. Again, cognates are words that look just like English. So here we can kind of see that arrive in there.
Oui. Quelle heure est-il? 14h45.
So here, we hear her ask the question, quelle heure est-il? See that form of the verb être again. And then we see the camera go up to the clock. So we can maybe associate whatever that sentence was is associated with time. And that's okay. And we can hear some numbers that we've learned. 14. And obviously we're operating on military time. And in France, that's very common when you're talking about work schedules, train schedules, planes, movies, things like that. Okay?
À peu près. Ça va, toi? Oui, très bien.
Okay, so we remember the phrase ça va. Might be a good time to practice that. Ça va? And her friend says, oui, très bien. Oui, très bien.
Qu'est-ce qu'il y a? Ma mère.
So we see that her friend stops, and we might not know what qu'est-ce qu'il y a means. That might not come up in our immediate memory, you know, that it means what's going on. It's a familiar way of saying what's going on, but we can see in their body language that Claire is kind of hesitating, and then her friend stops what she's saying. She stops after saying je, which means I, and we see those three dots, and so we can see that she sort of stops and then asks her that, and Claire then says something about ma mère, and that's a word that might look kind of familiar to us if we've done the appropriate amount of viewing of the video from the last chapter. Ma mère, another word that she used for her mother was maman. So this is a word that we might recognize. And if we kind of then pause and think about what happened with Claire and her mother in the last video, she went to go visit her in a psychiatric ward of a hospital. So with that context information, we might be able to build some more meaning.
Elle n'est pas... Non, non, pas du tout.
So we see some usage of some negative terms that we're going to learn about.
C'est que... Bon, tu le sais. Elle mange, elle joue aux cartes, elle lit et elle...
So here we're going to see some usages of these ER verbs that we were just talking about. These words that end in ER that we can 99% of the time count on being verbs or activity words. They end in ER in the infinitive form. So when we see them in real conversation here, they're conjugated, just like we learned how to do with être. So this is the form that matches elle, and we'll talk about that in our grammar PowerPoints. And if we look at our sheets in our book on page 34, we see manger, the verb elle mange. So she eats. Elle joue, that's the verb jouer, to play. Elle joue aux cartes, and we can kind of think that maybe that means cards, maybe not, we'll see. And these two are a little bit different, but if we remember that her mother is sick, elle lit et elle dort. So we can just sort of imagine what that might mean, and it doesn't mean that we won't understand what's going on if we don't know exactly. We can look it up after the video, but we can also say, okay, what might a sick person do? She reads and she sleeps.
Alors, elle mange, elle joue aux cartes, elle lit et elle dort. Elle existe, c'est tout.
So another ER verb here, elle existe. And of course, here again, we're seeing it in the conjugated form, but that's a great example of a cognate, existe, to exist. If you remember that in English, all of our infinitives, the master copy of the verbs, are in to dance, to sing, to exist, to eat. They always have that to. So here, we take away the to, she exists.
C'est trop triste. Et les hallucinations?
And here we can see a reminder that she's maybe having some trouble here in the way that we've talked about before. So the word hallucinations is exactly like that in English as well.
Elle a des moments de lucidité, mais
And so we stop here, and even if we don't know what this verb is here, we can look at this and there are some cognates. So we know elle means she, we know des means some, and then this is a cognate, moment, obviously means moments. And then if we look here, this looks like the word lucidity. So we can kind of construct something, she, some, moments, lucidity, and then we see this ellipsis here, and that's again a context clue. So she's going to say she, moments, lucidity, and then sort of pause. So what would that tell you if you could construct that sentence in English?
tu sais, Abia, ça fait plus de 6 ans qu'elle s'est fait interner.
And this is a pretty difficult part here. And really the only word that we've learned right here besides elle is six. So we know it's 6. And so we can look at this, and through our studies through the chapter, we'll see more and more about this meaning, and it's okay if you don't understand everything about this sentence. We can maybe think, okay, this is capitalized, so maybe this is her friend's name, Abia, okay? Plus looks like plus, so more maybe, okay? So more than 6 years, en means years. And we can look here at this word, which is also ends in ER, so we can assume it's an ER verb. We could look it up and see that it means to commit oneself. S'est fait interner, she committed herself. But that's okay if you didn't get all of that. Really, the only thing that you should have noticed there is six.
Oui, mais elle s'est fait interner volontairement, n'est-ce pas? Donc,
So here we've seen that before. And so really the only word here that we should have got is volontairement. So voluntarily. It looks a little bit like that. But if you didn't get that, that's okay. It's absolutely okay. We will learn about adverbs later on in the chapter. That's why it's important to watch the video over and over again.
elle peut sortir quand elle veut. Oui, mais c'est pas si facile. Elle souffre toujours des...
So we see another example there of an ER verb, souffre. Elle souffre. And she says she's suffering. But then she stops because someone walks by.
Bonjour, mère. Bonjour. On arrive. Viens. Il est presque 15 heures. Il faut travailler, ça va te changer les idées.
So here, there are a lot of words that we might not know, but we can sort of parse out what it might mean. We did talk a little bit about the words il faut in our last lessons. It is necessary. Here is a good example of what we would call a faux ami. So it is an ER verb. As we said, we can look at those ER words and figure that they're one of those verbs, but it looks like to travel. But in this case, it's not a cognate, it means to work. So it is necessary to work. We know ça va means it is going. We look here, we see that ER, okay, so to something. Look at it, it looks like change, so to change. And this may or may not look to you like the word ideas. So if it does, that's okay. If it doesn't, that's okay. But we could say, okay, ça va, it's going to change, and that would be what we could get from that. Even if that doesn't happen until the 5th or 6th viewing of the video, that's okay.
Oui, madame, je comprends. Vous pouvez passer à la réception pour venir chercher votre clé.
So we can see here that we've changed context, and that's really important to note again. This is obviously a hotel or a conference center, something like that. And so we can look at the words here. We know vous means you or y'all. Passé, if we look at that, there's that ER again. So we can figure that that's an action word. It's an ER verb. And we look and it has the word pass in it. So, okay, so you can pass. We know that this looks almost exactly like the word in English, réception. And the only other word that we might be able to figure out with a dictionary is this one here, chercher, because it has that ER. So if we look that up in the dictionary, we could find out that that means to look for. The other ones we would definitely have to look up. So here we have the word clé or key. So take a moment to pause the video and try to repeat the sentence, the key words in the sentence with her.
Merci. Bonjour, madame. Je peux vous aider?
Okay, so again, we've seen bonjour and madame. We know that. We know je. And we know the word vous means you or y'all. And then here we have another ER verb. Again, that ER that's coming up. And so if we look at that, we see aid. So maybe that means to help. So we have you. We might not know that this means can, but I, you, help. And that helps us to kind of figure out the context of what she's saying, even if we don't know. It says exactly, can I help you?
Bonjour, je m'appelle Madame Saxton. J'ai un problem.
So here we can see that this woman's accent is a little bit different, so that gives us a context clue that she may not be from France or a francophone country. This might give us a clue that she's talking about herself, even if we don't know why it's contracted like that. And this is definitely a cognate. It looks just like the word problem. And she says it just like that, and that's a great lesson. When we're speaking in French, we need to pronounce the word as it would be pronounced in French, even if it looks exactly like it would in English. So instead of saying it like she did, j'ai un problème, we would say j'ai un problème. So let's try and repeat that. J'ai un problème.
Parlez-vous anglais?
So here she's asking her if she speaks English, which would be a logical next question after she's repeated that word in English before.
Oui, yes. I'm Mrs. Saxton from the presidential suite. Ah, yeah? I have a teensy problem.
Mm-hmm.
I seem to have lost my husband. He was here with me a moment ago, and he just slipped away. Have you seen him? I'm sorry, madam. I don't know your husband. What does he look like? Well,
We can also gather some clues about this woman herself. Maybe because she can't find her husband, they're having marital problems. If we look at her, she has very nice jewelry on. She has on a fur-lined coat, and she also has on a beret, which isn't very common actually in any francophone countries. So it might be a stereotypical thing that she is wearing because she's in Canada.
See, he's this tall. Well, maybe a little taller. Maybe not that tall. I guess he's just average. He is bald, though. I mean, not bald, but I think, see, his hair is like, let's see, like that man there, talking to that young woman. Wait, that is my husband. Charles! Excuse me. What are you doing? Why are you talking to that Girl Scout? Oui, monsieur.
So we see here that a man in a hat and a coat, which is kind of a cliche for a detective or something like that, has come to give her an envelope with her name. And then he's gone.
Oui, monsieur. Je peux vous aider?
Again, we see this same sentence here that we saw before. Even if you don't recognize it, that's okay. We can recognize some words. Of course, oui and monsieur, but je and vous, and this ER verb, aider. So I, you, to help. So we can sort of construct a meaning out of that. Can I help you?
Merci, mademoiselle. Vous êtes Claire?
So he's just asked her with the verb être that we learned. Vous êtes Claire. Are you Claire? And so she's obviously a little bit shocked. She's saying pardon. And in French, that's how we say, I'm sorry, could you repeat that? Or come again? Or what? In a polite way.
Claire, c'est votre prénom, n'est-ce pas?
So he says Claire, c'est. We learned about c'est. That's, or it is, prénom. If we looked at that, it looks a little bit like pre and then name, but that's okay if that didn't come up to you. That's okay. But this is one way that we can form a question. We could put n'est-ce pas at the end of it. So he's saying, Claire, this is your name. It's your first name. Isn't that so?
Oui. Je m'appelle Claire. Claire Gagne.
Enchantée, Claire Gagné.
Enchantée.
C'est joli.
Pardon?
Votre prénom, c'est un joli prénom, Claire.
So we see some usages of the word joli as an adjective, as we learned about in the other chapter.
Merci. Vous êtes client à l'hôtel, monsieur?
Oui, excusez-moi.
So we can see that Claire is saying, vous êtes client. So are you a client? And that would be, we can put that together if we watch the video very carefully. We can put that together as a usage of the verb être with the word client, which looks just like client. So are you a client? And then she's obviously working in a hotel. And the word hôtel looks a lot like the word in English. We can see that she's sort of asking him, are you a client of the hôtel? And we can see here he says oui, and then excusez-moi. So this looks a lot like excuse. So he's trying to pardon himself.
Je m'appelle Alexis Prévost. Il y a un problème?
Non, non, monsieur Prévost. Puis-je faire quelque chose pour vous aider?
So again, we saw that word problème, and she says no. So we can say, okay, maybe he asked if there was a problem, and she said no. And we see again this thing that we've seen again and again, vous aider. So you to help. It's ER verb. And so if we think about what a hotel receptionist might say, maybe she's saying, can I help you with something?
Oui, ce ne sera pas long. J'ai oublié ma brosse à dents chez moi.
Okay, so here we really might not be able to establish anything in this sentence before we've gone through the grammar lessons for part one. But once we've gone through that, we can see here that when we make a sentence negative, we use the words ne and pas around the verb, and this is the verb right here. So we see that this is always going to signify a negative sentence. And this is what we can gather from multiple viewings of the video through part one of the chapter. So just through part one. So, okay, not long, we can see that, okay? And then here, we might not know any of this. So we might just have to say, okay, that's a part of the video that I might not understand right now. Although it does mean I forgot my toothbrush at my house, we might not need to understand that part, and that's okay. What we would need to recognize after multiple viewings is the ne pas.
Voilà.
Merci, mademoiselle.
Je vous en prie, Monsieur Prévost. Autre chose?
Non, c'est tout. Encore merci.
Qu'est-ce qu'il y a?
So again, we see this phrase that she's used again, and even if we didn't recognize it, maybe through multiple viewings of the video, by the end of the chapter, that phrase might look a little bit familiar, even if you don't know it exactly. So what's going on? What's up? What's going on with you?
Rien.
And she says nothing.
Je viens d'aider un homme très sympathique et très...
So she says, Je viens d'aider un homme très sympathique et très beau. So these are some adjectives that we might have seen before, sympathique and beau, ce qui veut dire handsome.
beau.
So here we see unknown guest.